Eleanor Harper inherited Thornwood Manor on a bleak, rain, lush Tuesday. How great, and Agatha, the woman as sharp and cold as the manor's gabled roofline, had finally succumbed back to time. The solicitor's let a spark of a substantial, albeit neglected, property. What it didn't mention was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty house, but a thick, watchful silence that settled like dust. The moment Eleanor crossed the threshold, she did see after the village whispers, cursed. They muttered, unhappy. Agatha Harper was in. The only one lingered there. Eleanor, practical and fueled by Edwin Lynn's bank account, dismissed them as rural superstition. Thornwood was her fresh start, a project to sink her inheritance and her grief over a failed life in the city into. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the scrape of cleaning and the grain of ancient floorboards. Then came the cold spots. Not drafts, Eleanor select every crack she found, but sudden, intense pockets of frigid air that would envelop her in the hallway, on the stairs. Once even in the sun-drenched morning room, they stole her breath and left gouts, flesh prickling on her skin. Then came the music, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind, whistling through a loose pane. But late one night, as Eleanor sat hunched over blue prints in the cavernous library, it crystallized the fragile, melancholic notes of a music box, a simple, repetitive lullaby, played just out of tune enough to set her teeth on edge. It seemed made to drift from the upper floors, specifically the sealed of West Wing. Agatha, as Will had explicitly forbidden her from entering until the estate was fully settled. Eleanor tried logic, old pipes, settling timbers, but the music had a distinct, mechanical rhythm, and the cold spots, they felt occupied. Sleep became fractured. She'd wait to the sensation of icy fingers brushing her cheek, or the distinct sound of awkward sigh near the foot of her four-poster bed. The air in her room would grow thick and heavy, smelling faintly of dried roses and damp earth. Fear, a cold serpent, began coiling in her gut, warring with her stubborn practicality. Driven by a mix of terror and defiance, Eleanor decided to confront the source. She needed it to access the West Wing anyway for renovation. Plans armed with a heavy torch in a racing heart, she approached the sturdy oak door, barring the wing's entrance. The lock surprisingly yielded easily to the large, old-fashioned key she'd found in Agatha's desk. The corridor beyond was a tomb, dust lay thick, undisturbed for decades, cobwebs draped like spectral veils. The air was stale and bitterly cold. At the far end stood a single door, a slightly aged Ayla. The lullaby was louder here, emanating from that room. It wasn't the tin and white sound of a small music box anymore. It was richer, fuller, yet infinitely sadder, as it played on a grand piano by ghostly hands. Pushing the door open, Eleanor stood being cut through the gloom, illuminating Orchard's nursery frozen in time. Pale blue wallpaper peeled at the edges. A rocking horsepan flagged stood sentinel in one corner. A small, ornate crypt dominant at the center, and beside it, covered in a dusty shroud, was an object roughly the size and shape of a harp. The music swelled, vibrating in her bones. The cold intensified, biting through her sweater. Shadows symmetry, deep and deepened unnaturally in the corners. Eleanor's breath misted violently in the torchlight. "Who is there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The music stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. Then a small, translucent figure materialized near the crib. A little girl, no older than 4 or 5, dressed in a faded white nightgown. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and impossibly dark. Holding an ocean of sorrow, she pointed a spectral finger not at Eleanor, but at the shrouded object. Play the voice was a mere breath of icy air, yet it echoed in Eleanor's mind. Finish the song. Terror threatened to paralyze her, but beneath it surged a profound, aching pity. This wasn't a male volume ENT spirit. It was a lost soul, trapped. Eleanor forced her legs to move, stepping towards the shroud. That object, with shaking hands, she pulled the dusty cloth away. It wasn't a harp. It was an exquisite, though neglected music box cabinet, intricately carved with roses and vines. On its top sat a porcelain ballerina, frozen mid, pure red. Eleanor remembered the solicitor mentioning a valuable music box collection Agatha had sold off decades ago, except for one piece deemed unsellable. heart hammering against her ribs. Eleanor lifted the lid. Inside, instead of a cylinder, lay a complex mechanism of pins and levers, designed to pluck strings, a serenade, capable of more complex tunes than a simple box. The lullaby string was partially pinned onto a dusty paper roll inside, but the end was torn, jagged, and finished. The little girl's form flickered. Mama promised, the whisper came, thick with tears Eleanor could end to see. She promised to finish it before. Before what? Eleanor didn't need to ask. The sorrow in the room, the sense of abrupt, terrible loss, told her the child had died. The lullaby, a promise from a mother to a sick child, had never been completed. Driven by instinct stronger than fear, Eleanor sat on the dusty nursery floor, using the tiny tools from her renovation kit she always carried. She carefully examined the torn paper roll. The melody was simple, haunting. She could hear the unresolved notes hanging in the frigid air. With painstaking care, her fingers numb with cold and fear, she sketched the missing notes onto a scrap of paper. Mimicking the pattern, she carefully spliced it onto the torn end using archival tape from her kit. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she wound the mechanism. It protested with a rusty groan. Then caught, she released the lever. The serenade whirred to life. The delicate pins plucked the strings. The familiar, melancholic lullaby began. Filling the silent, frozen nursery, it played through the non-section, then continued onto the part Eleanor had added. Two simple, resolving chords, turning the mournful tune into something softer, gentler. A promise finally kept. As the final note shimmered and faded, the little ghost gasped, a young like a released breath. Her translucent form brightened, the terrible sorrow in her dark eyes softening into something like wonder. She looked at Eleanor, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her pale lips. Thank you. The whisper was warm now, a breeze carrying the scent of roses. Mama's song is whole. The figure began to dissolve, not fading, but shimmering like sunlight on water. The crushing cold lifted, replaced by a sudden, profound warmth that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The oppressive silence broke, replaced by the ordinary creaks and sighs of an old house settling. Dust motes danced in a sudden beam of moonlight that pierced the grimy window. The music box sat silent, the porcelain ballerina still. The nursery felt empty, not just of people, but of the heavy, trapped grief that had saturated it. Eleanor sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of peace and release. Thornwood Manor was never truly silent again. It quake groaned and settled like any old house. The West Wing, once renovated, became Eleanor's favorite sunny studio. But sometimes late at night, when the wind was just right, residents in the village below swear they hear the faint, sweet, complete notes of a lullaby drifting down from Thornwood shades. And in the nursery, now bright and airy, the old music box cabinet remains, polished and cherished. Occasionally, visitors report feeling a sudden, gentle warmth near it, or catching the fleeting scent of dried roses on an otherwise ordinary day. And the cradle, it sits empty, a testament not to loss, but to a lullaby finally sung to its end.